Okay. Whoops. So why did Morocco why did Nador and the North become neglected? Well, this has to do with the history in the 50s when Morocco got its independence of the Rif, setting up a sort of a short-lived Rif republic, a revival of the republic that they had declared back in the 30s. Um, and then or the 20s, yeah, it was a while back there when they had declared their independence from Spain and fought back against them. And then in the 50s, there was a move to revive it once the former Mohammed V had taken over. So there was some feelings of sort of concern about it, but the new king Hassan II, he had taken over from his father in the early 60s. He um, was very close to a Berber guy from the north, Muhammad Ufkir, who was they'd been in school together, they had served together in the military, and then when there was an attempt made on the life of Muhammad, sorry, how I clicked the wrong button. I think we can still keep going. Wow. Didn't have to start that all over again. So I think he was a trusted member of the king's. He was a general, the king's sort of military staff, and so there was an attempt. There was an attempted coup d'état in '71, and there was a wedding party, and it was a conspiracy within the army, and they tried to kill the king. Um, with guns, and then the king's bodyguard fired back, and lots of guests were killed. It was a horrible thing. So the king, was deeply shocked at this conspiracy within his own military, and so he put Ufkir in charge of the ratting out these people. So there was just a police state after '71. So in '72, the king Hassan had been. This is the king who's king during McMurray's time there. King Hassan had been in France for a summit or something, and so he's flying back in his airplane, and the two fighter jets. Once he crosses over into Moroccan airspace, the fighter jets come to escort him in. But instead of sort of flying post on either side, they fall in behind him and start an open fire on the plane with the king in it. So the king says, please, tells the pilot, quick, sort of, here's what to tell him. So immediately, the pilot gets on the radio and says, "Hooray, we've killed him. He's dead. I just need to land so that we can, reclaim the body. Please stop shooting at us." And so the plane lands, and instead of pulling up to the um, terminal where he knows that the rest of the conspirators are there, the plane turns the opposite direction, goes and sort of crash lands next to the fence. The king, in perfect health, of course, jumps out, climbs over the fence, flags down a car, and takes him to people that he knows he can trust. And then sort of calls in calls in everybody, and they all converge on the airport terminal, and Ufkir was there, and Ufkir was behind it all. And there's scuttlebutt, there's legend that the king actually held the gun and killed his best friend in person. He then built an entirely new prison for his best friend's family, wife and kids and siblings, all of them. Went and arrested them from their home and took them to this new prison and put them in prison for the next 20 years. Uh, in 8 by 8 cells, basically. It was incredible, the anger that he had for having been betrayed in 1972. It was absolutely over the top police repression for the next 20 years. Incredibly violent, summary arrests and executions. People disappeared in the middle of the night. They had to have, after his son came to power, after he died and his son came to power in 1999, they had to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, basically to say, this is what happened to your son. This is how he was disappeared by his own government. So it was an incredibly brutal time, and the problem was that most of these conspirators had come from the Reef. They had come from up here. Um, they were Berber speakers, and they were Republicans, and they did not want to continue to have a king, and so no king visited the Reef for um, almost 30 years. From that time, throughout the rest of the 70s and all of the 80s and most of the 90s, it was only when his son took over. Hassan was actually married to several different women, but the mother of the one who eventually took over, Muhammad VI, was from, I believe, somewhere Tetuan or somewhere around in here. And so when um, Muhammad VI came, I think in 2001, to visit in Tetuan. That was the very first time that a sitting royal had visited any part of this northern Morocco for um, um, 30 years, 3 decades. It was incredible. So yeah, so there's this history of neglect in the late 80s when McMurray's there, neglected and bypassed, and it's also the site of most of the smuggling, not policed very closely either. Berbers, before and now. Berbers are these people. They speak a language that is not that distant from Arabic. It's Afro-Asiatic, like Arabic is, like Hebrew is, but it's probably as different from Arabic as Hebrew is. It's quite distinct. It's what they spoke in North Africa, for what they've been speaking in Africa for thousands of years. There's nothing new here. Um, it's spoken most of the sort of the single language native speakers are in Morocco, but there's also um, plenty of people speaking Berber in Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and even a few out here in an oasis in Egypt. And then there are Berber varieties spoken in Mali, Niger, and Mauritania as well. Um, or related languages, very very closely related languages. Um, the so-called Tuaregs. So here we have this situation where you have these people who are somewhat separate from the rest of the Arab world through their language. They were separated out in Algerian history as well under French colonialism, being seen as somehow a means of splitting the the population from Berber and non-Berber. Um, and then there are also a lot of rural people with their sheep and their sheepdogs and their little villages up in the mountains and stuff like that. Um, in in Morocco, there's Berbers of the Reef, and then there's Berbers of the Middle Atlas as well down in here. Um, and so you have multiple, and then there's Berbers down in the south as well. So there's uh, probably three or four different groups of Berbers, and then there's the Berbers in Algeria, and they actually saw themselves as different. They didn't see themselves as um, all one group until they actually all got to France. Uh, a lot of people immigrating to France, and once they get to France, they meet other people who speak their same language. They can understand their language, and then they're, oh, you speak, well, it sounds like you're from my hometown, but you're from another country. Yeah, so gradually they realized that they were all speaking really close dialects of the same language. Um, and they also had very localized tribal identities. According to McMurray, they're no longer interested in that. By the time he's gotten there to Nador, they don't know, they don't care. So we're seeing a lot of structural shift and breakup of old solidarities and transformations that are taking place. Chapter 1, we see the layout of the city of Nador. Um, we hear about U.S. immigration policy. We learn that when we have these employees of the federal government who are working in Morocco, who are charged with um, limiting the number of successful visa applications. Someone wants to go to America for some reason, not really uh, uh, shady at all, right? They want to go to Disney World, or they have a cousin they want to visit in New York or something like that. Um, if the U.S. immigration officer approves too many of those, his next posting is in Gabon or Burundi or Bhutan or some other sort of other part of the world. If he rejects more of those, then his next posting is in Switzerland or the Bahamas or something, something a lot nicer. So the goal is to just reject because it's better for your career, and it's terrible because people's lives are really crimped and limited. And this was already before 9/11, so imagine how much it got worse after 2001.